Okie dokie. Hello. Welcome to LoFi Bedtime Very Tales. I am thinking, feeling, and behaving well these days. I believe this is because I am surrounded by positive people. Are you? If you are not, then try to be, and always try to be the most positive person in any room or field or pool or gym or forest you are in. In this episode is a rather curious story about a magical flower in a fascinating place called Flowerville. I won't say much more other than it is about acceptance. Acceptance is a wonderful thing and promotes harmony. I dig harmony and I dig flowers too, literally and figuratively. And my patient listener, always remember to do things today to make tomorrow better. La 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 la. It starts with an F, ends with an E. In between is Flowerville. It's called Flowerville. Show me your seeds. There will be a petal and a bee there indeed. I don't know. That sounds all right. And now, from the bottom of the dusty basement, from the LoFi Bedtime Very Tales library, is Flowerville. There is a place where the flowers grow like blades of grass. They grow easily, and there are millions of them. It's the most vibrant place on this planet. At least that's what the town's motto claims. It boasts more flowers, types, and counts than any other place. Per capita, of course. Flowerville started as a seedling of an idea by a woman named Hilda, way before any of us were born. She had a hardscrabble upbringing. I guess the simplest way to say it was that her clothes for the day would be that way until she wore them through, and food was whatever was available. When she was coming up, times were incredibly trying and tough, like in the way that books were a luxury. Did you actually just hear that? Can you comprehend that? Books, not science books, but all books were considered a luxury because they were expensive. So expensive that most folks couldn't read. And they would never learn to read because books were so costly and teachers didn't exist outside of the nobility. Crazy times. I mean, you could not have much less read this story in those days unless you were a princess, a count, or a thief in the night or in the day. Purloiners do not take respite. And while stealing is wrong, who could ever blame someone for nicking a novel so they may learn how to read? It is not unlike someone snagging a spoon when they need to eat, and all that is available is soup. How could any rational person blame them? Anyway, Hilda believed that flowers were Mother Nature's way of making us happy. Even the ugliest flower is there such a thing? Would certainly brighten someone's day with its colors and way of just being there to be admired. She thought that every type of flower has its own specific purpose, and every variety has a right to be exactly where it sprouts out or wherever it has been officially planted. She believed that people and flowers were very similar and that not one flower or person was more important or exceptional than another. Hilda asserted that colors were best represented by flowers more than any other thing, and that every color seen on earth was also found on a flower. Her convictions about flowers did not stop on the ground. When gazing into the night sky, she didn't call the stars stars. She named them night blossoms, and the sun was the golden giver. Kinda poetic, right? Hilda would spend all her free time seeking out all the wildflowers she could find. Once she came upon an old man wearing a cape. He was bending over and tracing his long fingers across the pages of a weathered book. She introduced herself to him, and he smiled. He didn't say his name. Instead, he told her that he was trying to remember something in his book. Hilda said she couldn't read, but she would still try to help him. He thanked her and informed her that flowers were used to make the dye that made the most sought-after clothing. Hilda then thanked him and told him that she thought that flowers make themselves desirable to keep themselves alive. She continued by describing to him how she had discovered a way to have flowers mingle with one another to make even more exquisite flowers. He beamed with amazement at this news. Hilda then reported that she knew flowers made people happy and that they truly loved to be picked. It was then that he announced to her who he was. He was Randy, the royal gardener. Hilda's mind was overcome with more questions than hairs on a wild hare's hiney. He let her know that he would teach her all the information in his botanical manual before it had become fertilizer. It was literally falling apart into the ground as he carefully held it. Hilda was thrilled. She met him every week for several months. She learned so much that bees followed her around because she seemed to breathe out pollen, for she had so many flowers on the brain. When the first frost came, he was no longer able to meet her, for he had moved on to the great garden in the sky. She honored him by starting her first bed of blossoms where they had met. And that, my patient listener, was the germination of Flowerville. Everyone was astonished at how glorious her idea had flourished. It continued this way for many seasons. Hilda taught her children all that she knew about botanics with the promise that they did this too. Hilda ensured that those who oversaw Flowerville after her time in the Garden of Earth would have the same level of respect as she had. Hundreds of springs had come and gone, and now her great, wonderful, amazing, great, terrific, superb, great-granddaughter, Greta, was a pillar of flower fitness and quite the spinner of symbolic stories. If a person were to come upon her and had some time to chit the chat, Greta would be certain to implement genuine and generous manners and then begin a fantastic fable or potent parable, sure enough to alter one's day and possibly one's life. Greta's clothing was as colorful and as soft as a petal. She would sing to the flowers. The tulips preferred opera, while the carnations responded well to rap, and the roses enjoyed country and western. I'd like to think that all the flowers appreciated Greta's mellifluous melodies just fine and dandelion. Greta would often create a beautiful bouquet and stroll about town presenting it to all as if it were a newborn baby. Just like her ancestor Hilda, the bees followed her around town to the delight of it all. It was as if the bees were a flock of frolic. It was a village violation to bother the bees and their hives. Greta had yet to start her own family, so she dedicated all of her time, positivity, and enthusiastic energy towards the upkeep of Flowerville. One morning, while reviewing the progress of the monkey orchids, she noticed some novel shoots coming up right where the Venus slipper orchids began. These look like fennel or perhaps lemongrass? Maybe someone had accidentally dropped some seeds. She was not concerned about what may happen with the orchids, as she would be checking up on them twice a day. She moved on to the Dahlia pompons and noticed more of these shoots. She exclaimed, "Well, tell the pickles I won't be home for lunch." Nothing was amiss with these incredible flowers either, and the blue lilies nearby appeared to be as hearty as ever. Just then, someone startled her as she was deep into thought.
"I say, young lady, are you the gardener of this village?"
Greta turned and saw before her an older gentleman with a monocle. "Why, yes, I am. My name is Greta. A sincere pleasure to make your acquaintance. And who might you be?"
"Likewise, my name is Nathaniel Nickelberry. Regrettably, I have some rather somber news for you. We Nickelberries had donated this land many generations ago, and our agreement stipulated that the land would be returned to us after 250 years unless..."
Greta felt something in her belly that wasn't supposed to be there. It definitely didn't feel as good as how a flower looks. She replied, I don't know anything about that, sir. Mr. Nickelberry, we here in Flowerville keep to ourselves and maintain the land well." The mayor approached them, both holding weathered documents. She began,
"Greta, I'm sorry, but I have some disconcerting news. It seems that Mr. Nickelberry is accurate. Unless we can raise the money, we will have to return the village land back to his family."
Mr. Nickelberry added,
"Yes, we'd hate to have to do that, but what lies below is more valuable than what you have on the top of it. You have 29 nights to come up with this sum."
He then presented a number written on a piece of paper from his waistcoat. Greta exclaimed, "That's more dollars than flowers and seeds in the whole village."
"Not my dilemma, young lady,"
Mr. Nickelberry burped and turned and looked around as if he didn't know which way to go. The mayor provided,
"Sir, go towards the sun." "Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am eager to hear back from you on the status of things in 27 nights.
He stumbled himself towards the sun. Greta carped,
"I bet that a Nickelberry tastes like dirt."
The mayor replied,
"Now, Greta, I wouldn't disagree with you in the least. This agreement had been completed so long ago that it was simply forgotten about."
The two then spoke on creating money-making schemes to save the town. Even if they sold every single last flower and all but one seed representing each species they had, they still wouldn't have what they needed. What could they do? The mayor asked Greta to keep this matter to herself, and reported that there would be a village meeting on the morrow. Greta obliged and cried herself to sleep that night. The next morning she woke up and had her tea with the bees. She began her routine and noticed more of those shoots. Nothing was wrong with any of the flowers in the least. She completed her duties and attended the meeting. At no point did any of the village folk have a single positive reaction to the news. People seemed unable to generate any strategies either. Some even declared that they would be moving away before the deadline. Tempers were as short as the corn in June. What were they to do? Greta knew that selling seed could get them somewhere, but how far? And at what cost to the future generations of her flower children, regardless of wherever they may grow up? Greta thought to herself, why would anyone ever want to take away all of these gorgeous flowers from Earth to get something below that no one will cherish as much and only will be able to be used once? She couldn't sleep that night and went to take a midnight stroll amongst the expressions of love for Earth. Under the moonlight, she gazed up at the cosmos and then across the ground. She saw something that was as odd as an elephant on a moped. There was a myriad of illuminations nearby. She couldn't quite make out what it was, and her mind was racing because it was near the daisies. But it certainly wasn't a daisy. It had the spectrum of the rainbow across its petals, and the radiancy of its glow could only be described as like with neon lights. She burst towards it and marveled in it and the others just like it that were blooming too. She bounced with, "Oh my wonderful babies! You are so bewildering! Where did you come from?" Naturally, there was no answers because flowers cannot speak. Silly. Well, they can't speak yet. It was time for her to put the petal to the metal. So if you were listening to the story instead of reading it, just so you know, that was a written joke and not really a reading aloud joke unless you have the enunciation skills of a thespian. Anyway, Greta was in awe of the radiance of the color of these flowers, but also how they seemed to generate positivity too. She felt her spirits lifted with an optimism she had not quite experienced in her life. She thought to herself that the rainbow colors were filled with wonder, and she then exclaimed, "I name thee Wonderbow. You are the Wonderbow flower." She wanted to go and awaken the village folk, but she was captivated by these flowers. It seemed they had sprouted all across the land. She knew that some flowers and plants could cross-pollinate, but nothing like this. They all looked the same regardless of the other flowers they had sprouted nearby. The Wonderbow near the bonsai roses looked the same as those near the teddy bear sunflowers and as those near the dwarf gardenias. Greta pondered if the Wonderbows were flowers that just naturally developed as time had gone on. She thought of a few villagers who may assert that these new flowers aren't genuine and they are just made up to look that way. Everyone in the village knows that Greta abides to the code of the green thumb, and she would never mess with nature. Greta decided to go with the thought that it is now time to recognize and respect the Wonderbow flower. She went by all of the sproutings and sang to them. She did this until dawn. As dawn approached, the Wonderbows began to revert back into shoots. Greta was aware of other varieties of flowers that bloom only at night, and so she was not alarmed by this. They had plenty of them, but none glowed like the wonder bows. Instead of taking a much-needed nap, she went straight to work, tending to everything as usual. She was just doing this a couple hours earlier, mind you. Afterwards, she had a nap for lunch. Hold the mustard. After her nap, there was a rap at her door. Why, it was Mr. Nickelberry. Greta opened her door, and he opened his mouth.
I say, village gardener Jenna, I fear that we may have to have a meeting this week to begin the defloweration of this here village.
Greta replied,
Nope, we still have plenty of time, Mr. Nickelberry, and my name is Greta, not Jenna.
His nose shook a bit, and he retorted,
Why, I never.
He closed the door and searched both ways up the road to try to determine which way to go. Greta decided not to provide any assistance to him, as the mayor had generously done last time. He started ambling towards the sun again. Greta went and spoke with the mayor. She informed her on the wonder bow and besought her to come see the illumination this evening. The mayor presented and was starstruck by the refulgent radiance. The mayor reported that Greta must contact the Flower Society and try to register this new species of flower, so perhaps that may delay the village becoming a Nickelberry landfill. Greta agreed to the impactful idea and took some photographs with her camera. She only used her phone for making calls and playing Othello. She'd send the pictures to the Flower Society in the hope that someone would come and visit the village to verify the authenticity of the wonder bow. The mayor asked her to share some pics with her, and she obliged. Greta wasn't greedy. The next morning, there were news crews, people who like to digitally and visually share their lives with strangers as if it's important, and someone from the Flower Society showed up too. It seemed that the mayor's daughter, Desdemona, had posted the pics on a social media site that got lots of upvotes, shares, and comments. Flowerville had its large share of visitors each year, but the wonder bow was becoming a global sensation. The mayor would not allow anyone to come into contact with any of the flowers. She explained to everyone that they needed to figure out a way to celebrate this discovery in a safe and respectful manner. Most of the people didn't realize the blooming time of the flower was in the darkness of the sky because they only looked at the pictures and didn't read Desdemona's posts. No one was allowed to be near the flowers at night other than Greta and a small trusted crew of volunteers. So the people didn't get their way, and their egos were a bit more than ruffled. It was a bit sad to see adults not be able to manage their feelings whilst standing 50 yards from some of the most elegant representations of flowers the earth has to offer, and all together, too. Greta thought how all the flowers have been able to share the same land and work together in harmony to help one another survive and be the best corncockle or cheeseweed they could possibly ever be. Greta was not surprised that everyone had gone gaga to the max over the wonder bow, and despite its overwhelming grandeur, it was no more important than a plain old pansy to her. She held firm to the family tradition that all flowers were equal with one another and belonged right where they were. There had been mumblings that the wonder bows should be in a separate area where they can be appreciated on their own without other flowers being near them. That had about as much of a chance happening as an apple becoming a fire-breathing juggler at a carnival on Pluto. Basil, the representative from the Flower Society, spoke with Greta and took some samples from a wonder bow shoot to determine the DNA. He reported that he did not need to wait to get a clipping when it bloomed, but he wanted to wait and see the bloom for himself. Basil and Greta spent a fair amount of time together that day. He had flower puns and used wordplay to try and amuse Greta. She had a twinkle in her eye a few times, but she had a village to save and didn't have time to smell the roses with him. Basil was respectful and stopped before he felt the thorn of humiliation. When dusk began to arrive, Greta and Basil waited in suspense with cameras capturing the shoots blossoming into stunning saturations. They live-streamed the footage so as to try and please people who could never make it to Flowerville. It was stupendous. Basil was so excited he called his mother 5 time zones away. Since the tone of his voice was knee-deep into giddy, she was not upset with him for waking her up. Instead, she shared in the joy her son was experiencing. Greta and Basil stayed up all night keeping guard over the flowers, and they had to shoo a few people away from trying to sneak in. Basil left at dawn and promised that he would get the results as soon as possible. He mentioned an idea he had to save Flowerville. Greta listened and decided she would be patient and focused before trying anything else. Greta did her daily activities while Basil worked with his colleagues in the lab determining the origins of the wonder bows. The botanist bunch determined that the wonder bows were not different from any other flower. In fact, amundo, they were an amalgamation of over 70 flower species. It seemed that they had been in development since Hilda began everything all those years ago. There was always the potential for this new breed, if you will, and why don't you, to be represented. There had been other varieties that had been developed, but they weren't as resplendent as the wonder bow, and it was assumed that they didn't get as much attention, which is sad. All flowers, just like people, have their own purpose and are as lovely just as they are. Greta's family had always said the garden is symbolic of earth. It takes all kinds of flowers to make a garden and all kinds of people to make a planet. Basil phoned Greta and reported the society's findings. He then informed her he had already formally requested the National Society for Flowers and Fruits to make Flowerville a designated landmark free from anyone ever taking the land. Greta was grateful for his admirable assistance and allowed herself to get a little happy, just a bit. She was intrigued by the findings on the wonder bow's origins. It made sense to her, and she thought a bit further. Perhaps it was the right time for this flower to show up. Get it? Show up? Mr. Nickelberry presented and was in a stuffy mood. He barked,
"What's all this rigmarole here about some newfangled flower? I say, we shall be taking back our land, understand?"
Greta, feeling a bit more assertive than normal, returned,
"I wouldn't be holding my baby's breath just yet, Mr. Nickelberry."
Baby's breath is a sort of flower for those of you who have not been blessed with it as of yet. Greta continued,
"There may be some changes coming, changes that you may not be able to stop."
Mr. Nickelberry snapped.
"Why, I never!"
Greta quipped.
"Well, maybe you should."
And then she closed the door on him. It would be a few more days before the inevitably incredible news came and Flowerville was made into a National Historical Registry area forever. The village had a sing-along that people usually belt out in sports stadium where a ball is hit, kicked, thrown, or caught. The mayor almost stopped this public display of yay and recommended something more floral in nature. However, she knew everyone was more ecstatic than a bear tickling his tongue with honey, so she didn't change a thing. Mr. Nickelberry never returned, and everyone was pretty good with that. The Wonder Bow continued to bloom night after night. People were able to have small tours provided that they did a day tour first to celebrate all the other flowers. People began to understand and appreciate all the varieties of flowers and how each one, no matter how it looked or how new it was to Flowerville, belonged right where it was. The Wonder Bow's popularity actually got more people into gardening and thereby brought more people together, which brought more happiness, which seems to help flowers grow, which makes people happier, which helps make the story have the happiest ending that I could have ever harvested with the seeds of imagination that I have. Please let your gardens of goodness and acceptance grow, for we all belong and should be happy together. And I wish the best for you.